Hey everyone, it's David Sirota. Wanted to fill you in on some news about the tax bill that we've been reporting on at International Business Times. There's been a lot that's happened, and so if I look disheveled, that's why. I haven't slept all that much lately. Okay, so look, here's what's gone on. You've probably followed it. The bill passed. It was signed. The Republicans are all excited about it. Bob Corker continues to be on the defensive about what happened between the time that he voted against the bill and the time that he voted for the bill. So I want to review some of the reporting that we did on this, and then I want to tell you what he said this morning on Fox News and MSNBC. And if you want to post questions to me, I will try to answer them. I've got my laptop here. I can try to look at what's going on. So let's review what happened, what we originally reported. Bob Corker voted against the Senate version of the Republican tax bill. Bob Corker, the Senate Republican swing vote on this. He voted against the bill, claiming that he was concerned about deficits. That Senate bill included restrictions on pass-through entities. These are LLCs, partnerships, and the like. It included restrictions designed to make sure that the tax cuts for pass-through entities went to the kinds of pass-through entities that actually employ people. They're wage restrictions. Tax experts call them wage guardrails. Okay, so Bob Corker votes against the Senate bill that includes wage protections in the Senate bill. Then suddenly, and by the way, he cites deficits. Then he ends up voting for the final bill, which included a special provision that wasn't in either the House or the Senate bill, a special provision that allows pass-through entities, real estate-related pass-through entities, to access those special tax cuts. And what we reported was that Bob Corker is an investor in and a partner in a couple of very lucrative, large real estate partnerships. So let's review it again. When Bob Corker potentially could not personally have taken advantage of the tax provisions in the Senate tax bill, or at least some of those tax provisions, he voted against the bill. Then the provisions were added in that real estate moguls like him, by the way, Donald Trump and others, could take advantage of. Then suddenly he votes for the bill. He previously said he was voting against the bill for deficits. He was afraid to increase the deficit. The final bill increases the deficit by $1.5 trillion. And by the way, the restrictions on the tax cuts that were removed that I was talking about, those wage restrictions, actually arguably could make the bill more expensive because they're offering more tax cuts to different kinds of LLCs and pass-through entities. So it makes it a more expensive bill because people like Bob Corker, Donald Trump, and the like, this provision allows them to access those tax cuts. Those are all facts. Now, whether or not Bob Corker voted for the final bill because of those provisions, we haven't reported that. We haven't said he did it because of those provisions, because I can't get into Bob Corker's head. My job as a journalist is to report the facts and the fact pattern. No one has disputed the fact pattern that I have just laid out. It is literally indisputable. You can read the bills for yourself. And by the way, on Morning Joe this morning, it was hilarious. Joe Scarborough sort of threw out speculated. He asked, what do you think? Do you think this provision was leaked to these reporters who reported this? And I tweeted out today. I said, I know it's hard to believe, but we did the novel thing as journalists. We actually read the bill and then we reported on it. I know that's hard to believe that there wasn't some conspiracy theory going on here. We just simply read the actual legislation and then consulted with a number of experts about what it means. Okay, so I've given you the background. So what is Bob Corker saying? Well, he went on Fox News this morning. He went on MSNBC's Morning Joe, and he basically said much the same thing on both programs. He said that we made up the idea that he voted for the final bill because of these provisions. I want to reiterate, we have never said that. Other people want to speculate on that. Other people want to allege that. That's for them to do. We simply reported the fact pattern. And again, I have no idea why Bob Corker voted for the bill. By the way, he hasn't really provided a good answer for that. And I should add, I haven't heard anyone, and we've been attacked by Senator John Cornyn, we've been attacked by Orrin Hatch publicly, Bob Corker. No one's actually defended these provisions. I mean, like, made any kind of policy defense of this special provision. I mean, the closest it's gone is a guy, Kevin Brady, the Ways and Means Committee chairman, saying, this might help small businesses. But no one's really made a vociferous defense of these provisions. So Corker goes on Fox News and MSNBC, basically says we made up the story that he changed his vote for it, says he didn't change his vote because of this provision. And then he says it's basically unacceptable and malicious for people to ask him about this provision. I mean, you got to see the Fox News video where Brian Kilmeade of Fox and Friends is appalled that Wolf Blitzer on CNN would dare repeatedly ask Corker about this provision and how he could potentially be personally enriched by it, as if that's not what a journalist is supposed to do. I mean, that is our job, is to press politicians for answers. Now, some new news came out today on the Morning Joe part of this. On Morning Joe, Corker said that he was briefed on the differences between the House and Senate bills, and that Republican leaders did not tell him specifically about this provision. So that's a little bit of news. He's now saying, I don't know if he was saying he was misled, but he was sort of saying they never told him about this. Okay, that's interesting. He also said on Morning Joe that he thinks the pass-through provisions are very generous, and I'm paraphrasing here, but may need to be revisited in the future. So, and then Willie Geist, by the way, I thought it was a very good question. Willie Geist actually said to him, well, if you voted against the bill originally because of deficits, and you think the pass-through provisions that were put into the final bill are very generous and potentially overly generous, thereby making the deficit bigger, why'd you vote for the final bill? And he didn't have much of a great answer other than to say, I think the country's better with it than without it. So Corker made a little news here. Now, the other thing he did, which was appalling to me, at a fact-based level, and I'm not taking an ideological position here, but he said, these provisions were in the House, they're not new. Okay, that, according to experts and according to a reading of the bill, that's not true. That's just not true. The provision that was put into this bill was a new provision. Orrin Hatch said he wrote the provision into the conference committee, the House-Senate Conference Committee. It was not in the House bill. It was not in the Senate bill. You can read these bills. That's what we've been doing. That's what we reported. And we not only reported it ourselves, but we then went and verified it with various nonpartisan tax experts. So Corker's saying, it wasn't new. And so, and by the way, this whether it's new or not is kind of, what's the point of that argument? We're talking about the policy here, not the process. And he's saying, well, because it was already done, it wasn't new, and therefore it's not a big deal. But even on the process question, that's just demonstrably not true. So these are this debate is going to go on. I'm sure Bob Corker is pretty worried that his legacy as a senator is going to be defined by this. And people have called it the Corker kickback. And again, we have not called it that. We have simply reported the fact pattern. And so, it's important for us to do this reporting. And what you see in the response here is that Orrin Hatch, John Cornyn, John Cornyn really went off on us. Orrin Hatch, John Cornyn, Bob Corker, they don't think that people should ask questions about this. They think journalists literally are out of line by reporting on this and asking about this. And I just take a different view. My job is to report the fact patterns and the facts, whether it offends a politician from one party or a politician from another party. That is my job. That is what I am supposed to be doing as a journalist. And as I said, when I went on MSNBC and talked about this, I said, my hope is that what's gone on here will inspire other journalists to take a look at the personal financial disclosures of lawmakers of both parties and compare them to their votes and their actions on legislation. We need more reporting on how and if public policy is benefiting the lawmakers personally that are putting the public policies together. There hasn't been enough of that reporting. I think our story has inspired some of that subsequently. CNBC and Forbes has both published stories subsequently about how different provisions might enrich other lawmakers in this bill. So I'm encouraged by that, but it's really, really important and again, I want to say for when it comes to either party on this. So I'm looking for questions. If anybody has any questions, I can kind of keep talking here. But if anybody has any specific questions, Here's a question that was mentioning the question about whether this provision was airdropped into the bill. That was a comment made by Senator Ron Wyden to us. Was the provision airdropped into the final bill? I mean, they're focusing on this process argument. And again, I go back to, look, tax experts told us that you could look at the provision and see it as something of a compromise between the House bill and the Senate bill. That if looked at one way, you could look at it that way. But they've also said the provision itself was not in either bill. And the important part about the provision, and we ran the numbers on this, well, we didn't, the Urban Institute Tax Policy Center did. They looked at IRS data, and they looked at what's the difference between the Senate bill and the final bill as it relates to this provision. Who does it most benefit? They ran those numbers. You can run that data. And what do you know? The provision primarily enriches the real estate industry, real estate investors. So I think this is an important component of this, and we wrote a story about this, which is that this wasn't just some random provision put in there to broadly expand the tax cuts for pass-through entities. It was a carefully crafted provision that specifically, primarily benefits the very real estate industry that Bob Corker is a major investor in. He is a major, well-known, famous real estate mogul, as is Donald Trump. So this provision, tailored by Orrin Hatch, was crafted in a way that specifically benefited the very industry in which Bob Corker comes out of and in which Bob Corker has lots of investments. So the idea that this is just some random thing that, you know, that was just a compromise, a general compromise, it was a narrowly crafted provision, and that is really, really important. That's a piece of this, and we wrote a story about that. So I'm happy to take any other questions of yours. If you want to go onto my Twitter feed, I can come back. You can post questions here. I can certainly come back for another live video here, either today or tomorrow. Please post your questions. I'm happy to answer any questions about this. Our reporting continues on this, whether Bob Corker, whether John Cornyn, whether Orrin Hatch likes it or not.